Welcome back to Rico 12. I'm Justin, I'm the host, and this is a continuation of the episode that was released on Saturday on Step 2 by Harvey E. As mentioned in that previous episode, we split this up into two because of the time that it took to have that amazing conversation with him. If you have not yet listened to the first part of this, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it. Just a reminder that typically Rico 12 is a live speaker meeting podcast. We have typically a live meeting every Friday at noon Central Time, but during the month of December of 2022, I am taking those days to spend with my family and re-releasing this Journey in Recovery series that I recorded in the Journey Through Life podcast back in 2019. So this is an ongoing of that, covering each of the 12 steps of recovery. Now, a reminder to you, please, if you find value in Rico 12 and in these conversations and any other that we have, please consider donating and joining our groups, our WhatsApp group, our Facebook group, and just joining in our community and sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us and with others. Please consider donating. The links, information will be in the show notes, and we're just happy you're here. Jump in and enjoy the rest of this conversation with Harvey E., who, as mentioned in the previous episode, is someone who is pivotal in my own walk with God, with my fellows, and in recovery. Here we go. On Monday, I released the first part of Step 2 with Harvey E. In that conversation, he talked about his experience in addiction and his first steps towards recovery. He also started touching on Step 2. In this second part of that two-part episode, Harvey will dig deep into Step 2 and his experience, strength, and hope. Now, if you're just jumping in right now, midstream, I think it would probably be wise to go back and listen to at least the first part of this conversation with Harvey, or you might feel a little lost. It might also be helpful to listen to Step 1 at some point, if not even before you listen to the first part of Harvey's Step 2, if you haven't already listened to that. Because these steps, they come in an order. They were written in an order, and there's a reason behind that. Now, as a reminder, Step 2 reads, "Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity." Now, I love the manner in which Harvey discusses addiction, recovery, and Step 2, and I love the way his sponsor walked him through Step 2 and the rest of the steps. And I love Harvey. This guy's a stud. And I think that you may grow to love him also in his experiences, strength, and hope as he walks through the depths of hopelessness and powerlessness towards a dim light that was shown to him almost 6 years ago. And now that light is bright and full of warmth. Now you may be introduced to concepts that you may have never before considered, or may even seem contradictory to what you have considered truth for perhaps your whole life. But these concepts are shared as honestly and openly as possible, using real experiences that cannot be denied as being true. While you listen, take mental or physical notes of ideas of self-improvement that pop into your head. Then, at the end of this podcast, review those notes and make a plan about how you can implement them. Now, kick back or hit the road or do house or yard work or whatever you do while listening to podcasts. I love podcasts for that reason. I can do productive things and still be listening and learning. Anyways, be ready to learn and feel and gain insights like you may have never considered before. Here we go again with Part 2 of Harvey E., Step 2. I love how you said, eventually it seems that most people that are doing this have a melding of the old and the new, and it becomes one. And for me, I think oftentimes that I look back at my youth and childhood and I say, well, why didn't my church teach me this from the beginning? Why did I understand things so differently and saw that God of anger, of shaming, of these things? And then as that awakening happens, I go, oh, I think they were telling me that, but it was my own self that was creating these different angles that it was coming from, the shaming and the anger and everything. And now I go, oh, it's coming back together, and it makes a lot more sense now. That's kind of an awakening in my own life with that. And I love how you describe that with that melding back together of the old and the new.
It's interesting that there's an inventory exercise that's done in one of the books that we use in SA called Step into Action. And they describe in step 2, they actually ask you to write out things like, who are the powerful people in your life? Who were your godly experiences as a child? And what were those like? Because we pattern our relationship to our God, our real higher power, with the higher powers that we experienced as children, right? So if we had a perfectionist mother like I had, then you go into life thinking God is a perfectionist and he expects perfection, and nothing less than perfection will ever do. And if you only get 100 out of 103, you didn't do well enough, and you failed. You failed me, and you are bad. And the shame stuff comes in, and the toxic shame. And if you had a father who was always working and he was unavailable and he wasn't there for you, and he never asked you how it was playing in the park today, and how you're managing with your friends. So you get to find that God that isn't available for you, isn't there, doesn't care what's going on in here.
Yeah.
And you had a boss who was critical and whose expectations, I think we grow up thinking of God as kind of the CEO of the company, and you're an employee. And as long as you're doing your work well, you can stay and have your job. And the moment you stop being useful and you stop being profitable, you're out the door.
Right.
And of course, that's not the relationship that I certainly want to have with my higher power today.
Right.
And today I experience, sometimes on a daily basis, I can feel certain times that, I'm the prodigal son who went off and spent his money and screwed up, but came back, and I got met at the door with the fattened calf, and that beautiful, the beautiful allegory of that story.
Yeah.
That's a day-to-day thing for me. I have to feel that, and I know he's there for me that way.
Very cool. So, Harvey, I want to kind of go through this step 2 inventory with you. Talk about your mother and the perfectionist. Kind of walk through that, and then columns 3 and 4. Talk about your understandings, because this inventory, when I came across this step 2 inventory, and it was 4 years into my own process of recovery before I came across this thing. It opened my eyes so much to my relationship with God. So let's kind of do that with just that maybe that one instance with your mom and perfectionism, or you can do another one.
So I grew up in a home where, as I was saying, my parents were both Holocaust survivors. My mother was a perfectionist, and she was a neat freak. And we ended up locking the doors 3 times every night and making sure all the windows were shuttered. And fear was definitely something that we grew up with. That super clean stuff was really nuts. And I grew up in a world where the expectation of perfection was so profound. I was a pianist. I learned how to play piano when I was a little boy. I had a musical bent, a talent. And somebody encouraged my mother to give me piano lessons. And we did not have a lot of money in the house. My father worked very hard to put food on the table. He taught us a good work ethic. In fact, I remember very clearly one day, every year, on a certain day of the year, he would take all of us in the car and he would drive us downtown to a street. And I wish I could remember where that street was. I can't. And it was a cobblestone street. And he would get out of the car. We would all get out of the car, and we would all get on the ground and rub our hands along these cobblestones, as he described having laid those cobblestones in his early life in Toronto before he got a job as a contractor. He had laid those stones on that street. And he had such a feeling he just wanted to share how important it was to have the joy of good work. Of doing good work. And he used to do that on a yearly basis. that was the one. So it's one of the few stories that I can think of my father actually taking us anywhere.
Wow.
But he would do that every year. We had an annual visit to this cobblestone street. To show his pride in his work. Wow. And how important that was. But going to piano lessons was what I wanted to share with you. My mother used to drive me to piano lessons, and we did not have money for piano lessons. But my mother decided that it was worth it because I did have a musical background, musical talent. But all the way to the piano lesson, my mother would drill into me how we weren't going to have meat for dinner tonight because I was giving you piano lessons.
Wow.
And you better do really, really well when we enroll you in the festival, and you have to be playing against other children your age, and you've got to win first prize.
Wow.
And that was the way piano lessons were drilled into me, and the work of learning how to play piano. So as much as I love music, and interestingly, as a quick aside, I believe there's a lot of people in the addiction world who have a lot of creative talent. There's a lot of musicians, there's a lot of artists, there's a lot of wordsmiths. There are people with real talent, creative talent. And I, for one, believe, and I think that I'm finding this is true, that as addicts, we knew we were powerless and we needed some kind of spiritual power. And I found it in music. And my wife swears that she never would have married me if she hadn't seen me playing the piano.
Oh, wow.
She sensed there was something there. She hardly ever saw it again. But when we were, watching me compose or play or just be musical and creative in that world was perhaps one of the only moments that she sensed the spiritual, the real Harvey coming out. My mother was this crazy perfectionist, and she could drive me nuts. And she's 98 years old today, and she still has, if I would give her that power, she could still have that power to make me nuts. But I have a routine around all of that.
Yeah. So what did you learn about God from that? What did you put on God from that relationship?
So God was the perfectionist. God had expectations that I could never meet. God was unfair. My mother always treated my older brother with deference, and he was the prince, and the rest of us were the underlings. And my mother taught us that as we grew up, we had to respect everyone older than us. So every day, believe it or not, I had to call my mother to check in. And I had to call my older brother because he was older than me. My younger twin brother had to call me, and my younger brother had to call all of us.
Wow.
And this was a routine that she had set up. Very early on, we had this routine where, having been a Holocaust survivor, family was super, super important because she loved
understandable.
Yeah. Yes, of course. So there was an expectation. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of judgment. My mother was the educated one in the family. My dad was not educated. He did not have the opportunity to get an education when he was growing up in Poland before the war. He was a man who worked with his hands, and he did well. He was very proud of his work. But in my mother's world, he was the uneducated brute and never was going to measure up. And all of us were going to be professionals, not like Daddy. So she emasculated him. And so it was difficult. And then, of course, I had my father. So we'll go to Dad now. And my father worked every day of the week almost. Growing up, I wasn't in a religious home, so he would work Saturdays, he would work Sundays. Like I said, he had a tremendous feeling of that good work is important, and he understood that. But he was so distant. He stayed away from the house a lot because it was difficult for him to feel valuable in the home that my mother was creating and the values that she was professing to us. He just didn't measure up, and he knew it. and he felt it. So he would find opportunities. I don't know whether he was a sexaholic or not, or what he was, because I don't, he died when I was 12, so I never got a chance to really get to know him in an adult way. He was definitely not there. He was just a very distant, very weak, very, in many ways. Every so often he would get angry, but he never touched us. He was afraid. He was afraid he'd kill us. He was very strong. He worked with his arms, his hands. He was a strong man. So my mother was the woman who meted out punishment, physical punishment. She'd run after us and run around the rooms until she caught up with us. We'd run into the bathroom, lock the door, We did a lot of that. So the two of them, it was a very, very difficult. So my God, of course, was all of that, In many ways, impatient and perfectionist with great expectations that could never be met. And at the same time, abandoning, distant, not very powerful in many ways, weak, and those are the two of them, It was hard to live there.
Wow. So with those, very contradictory type images of what you learned about God from those two, your parents, now with the new God that you've hired, what's the truth you choose to believe today in those two aspects?
So my God today, I like to think of him as a combination of my biggest fan. He's the president of my fan club, and he's my coach. He's my manager. If this is a wrestling fight, he's in my corner. He's shouting out ideas, give me your left, give me your right, watch out, he's there to support me. He's there to give me, to try to make me the best Harvey that I'm ever going to be. And he wants that for me. He delights in that for me. But he loves me before I go out into the wrestling match and after, whether I win or lose. He's there for me, and he's my greatest fan. And he doesn't have, I don't like the word expectations because that brings horrible memories for me. So I had to find a God that doesn't have expectations. So I talk about him as delighting in me when I do, his will, when I live a godly life, a spiritually present existence. Of course, he delights in that. But he doesn't feel any worse about me. He doesn't hate me anymore or disappointed in me if I don't manage today. My job is to wake up every morning with a new resolve to be the best Harvey that I can be, do all I can during my day. At the end of my day, step 10, 11, 12, 10 says to me, I go over my day and see where did I miss the mark, right? And that's how I look at sin, right? Sin is not shaming anymore. There's guilt, right? But guilt and shame are very, very different. Guilt is I missed the mark. Shame is I am bad. Right. I didn't do something bad. I am bad. I never want to go back to that again. That's toxic shame. I'm not going there. Guilt is something that I can relate to on a daily basis, and I do, because I don't want to carry it to the next day. At the end of the day, I say, oh, you know what? I was rude to my wife today. I wasn't kind. I wasn't considerate. I have to make amends, and I'll do that right away. And then I get good with God, and I go to bed, and I meditate into sleep, understanding that I've done everything I'm supposed to do today, and tomorrow's a new day.
So I love your perspectives that you're bringing into this. It's helping me open up my eyes even more to, step 2, a place that I think, I've got this stuff figured out. For several years, I've been working through this stuff and sponsoring and having a sponsor and everything, and I got it figured out. But when you talk to somebody else and get their perspective, it just expands that understanding that much more. And I really appreciate that from you, Harvey. It's been very helpful to have this conversation with you. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned, I think you said 5 kids and 18 grandkids. You got this big family. Tell me what the family dynamic in your addiction and now in the recovery process. How are they involved, if at all?
So in my addiction, my children most of the time were in the way, I have to admit, which is a horrible thing to have to say. But they were in the way, I didn't have to think about, having to pick up this kid at this particular time. I could have run downtown and been there, done all those things, So they were in the way. They were really in the way. Today, thankfully, each one of them in turn has opened up to me, shared with me some of their own feelings of resentments that they have about what I was or wasn't there for, how I missed the boat, if I did, and I did in every one of their cases. Part of my amends in the 9th step, as you get further along in recovery, you start to realize that there's stuff you didn't even realize you had done to your children that you now have to go back. I appreciate today, which something I didn't appreciate in the first little while, was how little I patterned what normal coupleship should have been. That my children should have had a paradigm on which to base how they relate to their spouses. And they didn't get that from me because my wife and I didn't relate.
Right.
We lived a loveless marriage in a very distant kind of, we walked past each other, and we did everything right in terms of raising the kids and paid for their schooling and got them where they needed to get to. And thankfully, they're all in happy, what I believe is, I hope, happy marriages and with wonderful, healthy children and all of that. But that's in spite of me, I can tell you for sure. And today, we have a tradition in the Jewish faith before the Day of Atonement that we call the people that we care about, and we asked for forgiveness for anything we might have done in that year. I remember the first year that I did that after I started in recovery. And 4 out of my 5 children said, "Oh, Daddy, what are you talking about? Of course, I forgive you. You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything."
Right.
And they wouldn't even admit it. My second daughter, her name is Leah. I called Leah and I said, "I'm calling. It's the day before the Day of Atonement, and I just want to tell you that I'm really, really sorry, and I want you to, I hope that you can, forgive me," which isn't a real amends, right? Because in amends, you don't ask for forgiveness. That's something that, you're not doing it for the forgiveness. You're doing it to need to unload. But anyway, in this religious situation, you call up your kids, and I asked for forgiveness. I said, "I hope you can forgive me." And she said, "I'm working on it." And that was one of the most profound. I hung up and I just started bawling. Yeah. Because she was the only one who had been honest enough to say what was really going on with her. And she could say, "I'm working on it." And today, 5 years later, we have a tremendous, tremendous relationship, I believe, and it doesn't compare. And they regularly hear from me, I hope, in my living amends, if I can be that light to them to appreciate and help them appreciate that whatever they're going through, as I understand now, God loves them. And God is perhaps giving them a lesson rather than a gift, or maybe I can't see the gift yet. I can see the lesson, but I need to see the lesson in what I'm going through today and see it as a lesson that God is sharing with me, with them, in order for us to become the better people that we were meant to be. So, everything in my life today is a lesson or a gift. And eventually even the lessons are gifts.
So how is the relationship between you and your wife? How has that changed over the last handful of years as you've been working your recovery?
So interestingly, in 2012, my wife confronted me with the understanding that she had figured out that I was living a double life. And that's what brought me into my first therapist.
So it had been, she was unaware of it until, or at least
35 years in.
You.
Right.
Yeah.
Or to herself.
Right.
I think she probably, in the back of her mind, I had done a really good job of what we call gaslighting, right? Making her think she was crazy.
Right.
And when she noticed things, or when she found parking tickets for places that I should never have been near, and visa bills. I was pretty careful about visa stuff, but there was, it shocked me that how she could have not figured it out all those years.
Right.
And when she finally confronted me, she brought, actually in this room right here where I am, she told me to come in and sit down, and she pulled out a letter that she had prepared. And she read this to me, and she says, "Harvey, you need to get help." And she was determined that she wanted to stay.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't throw me out. She said, "Harvey, I love you. I want you to get help. You need to work on this." And again, it wasn't as an addict. She didn't get that either. She didn't know I was an addict. She just knew that I was same-sex attracted, and she wanted me to get help in that. So I went immediately. It was the scariest moment in my life, probably, certainly one of the most scariest moments of life. But in the end, it's another moment where I today understand that had she not been through that at that moment, if she hadn't confronted me and realized what I was up to, other things that happened later in my day, in the same year, in fact, I got arrested for stuff I did 40 years before with young boys in a choir that I conducted. And I pleaded guilty for that. And if she hadn't figured out what was going on in my life until then, God only knows what she would have done. If the police had called me in, and that was the first time that I'd had to explain all of this. She already had, in this case, she had 6 months to prepare. So today I understand that it was scary as heck, but God was at a present. I mean, that was such a gift, and that it prepared her for the craziness that my life turned into, and and all the stuff that she was there for me and stood beside me, held my hand. She was really super support.
And that relationship, I'm assuming, has blossomed, has gotten stronger than it's ever been. Am I correct in that?
In many ways, she's a little jealous of the program, because for me, depending on how crazy my life is and how restless and irritable and discontented I can get, I let myself, which I try not to, of course. But if I do, I know that I need a meeting, or I know that I need to work harder with my sponsees. I need to make a phone call, and she's looking for what every woman wants, I think, attention, quality time, the languages of love, which you may or may have, understand, right? So every woman has a different language of love, primary, secondary. I have different languages of love than she has. So, for her, at a certain point, I remember her saying to me, "I'm so sick of, how much time you're spending at meetings and how much time you're spending on the phone. And you walk into this room and you close the door on me and you leave me out of it. And I feel so like there's a mistress, and you have a new mistress, like you have a new addiction."
Right.
So in jest, I often say to her, "Well, if you're interested, I'll go back to the old one." And she's never taken me up on that.
Right.
And I remember we did a cruise after 2 years, and on the cruise there was a woman on the cruise there was of course meetings every day on the ship. Friends of Bill W, they call it.
Oh, cool.
Right? So I would go upstairs to the meetings. I was the only sexaholic in the room as far as I know, but there were alcoholics abound,
Right.
And there was this woman who had like 20 years of sobriety. So I shared with her that my wife was feeling, even in that few minutes that I would go up to a meeting for an hour before dinner, she would like, "Why are you leaving me? We're on vacation together. We should be 24/7. Of course, I don't know how to do 24/7 with anything, but at the time it was very hard for me, and I needed to get on my internet and talk to my sponsees, and I needed to go to that meeting. And so she said to me, she says, "Harvey, just hang on, because you won't need as much, probably, and she'll learn to respect and appreciate your self-care." So that's been the work. She does love me, and she does care, and we've had a lovely family and a lovely life together, and we actually have an intimate relationship today, which we hadn't had for many years, which is wonderful. But she still, every so often, she feels like I'm number two, and my sponsor always says, as we said a little bit earlier, the foundation of my life has to be the connection to my higher power. And then there's a priority of what it comes next, what comes in my life. And in my life, once I'm breathing, so to speak, family and wife come first.
Yeah.
Job comes second, and sponsees and people in my program and community come third. And I have to make sure that I always know that there's a priority, that priority makes sense.
Yeah.
And service doesn't have to be making coffee at meetings. Service can be being available for your wife and being there for her and spending the time with her. And that's just as important, and it's just as valuable. And the truth is, as we appreciate, I think, in the program as sponsors, we are learning. It's kind of like a laboratory where we learn how to treat human beings again and be human beings again. And the work that we learn in working with sponsees should be there to translate into how we relate to our families and to our employees or our patients or whatever we have.
Oh, very good. So has your wife ever got involved in like S-Anon or any of the recovery things for spouses and family or anything like that?
Yeah, so she does have a group. She did go to S-Anon, although she found it, again, I remember early on, I used to do a lot of phone meetings, and I would be speaking to people all over the country, and I would ask about, because my wife had not yet ever gone to an S-Anon meeting, and I would ask, in the parking lot, people in the meeting, after the meetings, we call that the parking lot, and I would say, so does your wife go to S-Anon? What do you think? And they would say, and some of them either would swear by it or they would swear at it. And the combination, the opposite, like I said, wait a minute, is S-Anon good? Is S-Anon bad? And of course, just like any 12-step meeting can be a healthy meeting or an unhealthy meeting. If it's concentrating on the solution, then then it's a great meeting. And if it's concentrating on the problem, it's a crappy meeting, and if the women are sitting in a room talking about how crappy life is and how they need to have their husbands on 6-month, polygraphs and there's no faith and there's no trust and they're not gaining any trust. And, then we call that a wine cellar. And if it's a wine cellar, my wife found S-Anon in Toronto to be a wine cellar. So she stopped going, so her work is with people. She makes phone calls to people outside of the city like I do, where she has found women in recovery, and we've done some work as couples in recovery, and we have done some work in therapy with family counseling, with wife, couple marriage counseling, and we've done all of those things, and we're still in the process, but there is that, and she has a group of women that she gets together with, which is also very, very helpful.
Oh yeah,
S-Anon just happens not to be it for her.
No, and that's great. I'm glad that she has found her group where it can be productive and not, like you said, a wine cellar where we're man bashing or, whatever it may be. And I don't ever find those when I talk to people or my spouse or anybody about those things. I've never found those to be helpful, although other people seem to get some sort of satisfaction out of doing that. So
my wife's very first meeting was a Wednesday night in June of the first year that I was in recovery. I was in the program. I started in January. In June, I was 5 months sober, and I went on a retreat to do some work on my same-sex attraction work. And then I came back, and I had a bit of a crash because it was such a high, and then it would, you have that moment afterwards where you go back to life, and and everything starts to come, And that was exactly the Wednesday night that I had to go downtown to a meeting, which was in the middle of the most incredibly dense drug culture neighborhood. There's a church down in that area. And my wife was at an S-Anon meeting. I was in a church that was surrounded by buildings where every building had an escort that I used to attend.
Oh, wow.
So it was a pretty scary place for me to go to on a good day.
Yeah.
I don't know why they made the meetings there, but that's where it was. And I came out of that meeting. It was the closest I ever came to losing my sobriety in the 6 years that I've been in the program.
Wow.
And I remember my wife came home and she says, Harvey, do you know there were 3 women who came to me and asked me if I've got you on a polygraph, 6-month polygraph. And I said, oh yeah. And I was like waiting to hear what she'd say. She says, it didn't sound right, but I can't put my finger on what was bothering me. Harvey, what do you think is bothering me? She asked me. And I said, I don't know what's bothering you, but I can tell you what's bothering me.
Yeah.
I said, a polygraph test when I'm waiting the 6 months for the next polygraph test as a wife or as a husband, whoever the partner of the addict is, for that entire 6 months, I don't have any trust. I have no trust in that person, right? I go to that, he goes to that polygraph or she goes to that polygraph and she passes or he passes, right? So then retroactively, I know I should have trusted him for the last 6 months, but I got nowhere in practicing that effort to be trusting. Yeah. And tomorrow I'm going to start again, not trusting him for the next 6 months, right? Until the next polygraph.
So like expecting failure.
Well, not only expecting failure, but it's not building the opportunity, just like meetings are about learning how to be honest and practicing that honesty muscle, which of course as addicts we never had.
Right.
We lie about everything, even when we don't have to lie about, even for nothing, we'll lie. So I don't understand how that's supposed to be helpful. And yet there are many, many therapists and many, many people in the S&on world who expect and demand and have an understanding that this is like par for the course. I don't understand why it's par for the course, but that's my own personal my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I like that. What is your take? So here's something that I run into fairly regularly in meetings that I attend. Somebody comes in and I'll just get through these 12 steps one time through and then I'll be healed and disappear and run off and never come back. I'll be healed at that point. Or
that's good already. That's good. If they come to the meeting ready to do the 12 steps, you're already ahead of the game. In my experience, the newcomers come in and they've just been caught by their wives. And the only way they were able to stay in the house was admitting that they were, or pretending that they admitted they were addicts. Right. That they could say to their wives, I'm sick, help me, I'm a victim, and then they go to meetings, right?
Right. But what I mean is not even working the 12 steps, just reading through the 12 steps at these meetings, going through the reading process and, I've read through it. I set my book on the shelf every week and come back every Tuesday, pull the book off the shelf and go back to the meeting and read.
Right.
How do you combat that maybe natural tendency of human nature to just do the minimum necessary and figure out, hey, when I reach this line, I'll be good and I'll never have to worry about it again?
So you're going to find there's 2 different groups in this, right? There's the one guy who shows up and he doesn't do much of the work, as you described. He's done a little reading and he shows up to meetings. It's like bowling. They go bowling every Tuesday, so they go to a meeting every Tuesday, and it's great. And they love the fellowship. They get into it. They the camaraderie. You go for coffee afterwards. You go for whatever, and it's wonderful. And usually within a few months, they stop coming because their wives have forgiven them. And they go back to their life, or they continue coming because it's, like I said, it's like bowling and they enjoy it and they come and they don't do any steps and they stay sober, right? Because they really weren't addicts in the first place, right? Because if they were really addicts, they wouldn't stay sober, right? I can't stay sober without a program. I've learned that. I know that. Right? If a guy sits in a room and he's sitting here and he's not doing steps and he doesn't have a sponsor and he's just doing a little reading every week and he's staying sober, you got to wonder, you say, whoa, what does that mean? And that actually can mess up the newcomer, because the newcomer meets somebody in a meeting and he's not doing steps and he looks pretty happy. And he likes the camaraderie. He likes the fun of the meetings, and there's a joy to his life. And you can mistakenly believe, oh wow, I don't have to do this much work. Look at him; he's not doing anything. He pretends he's doing steps. He doesn't even have a sponsor, and he's sober. Then of course there's the other group of people, the other half of the room, which is full of people who are they really are addicts, and oftentimes they're dry. And they don't look happy. They're at the jumping off point, as the big book says. They're living a very, very ugly life. It's a very, very horrible life, because every day they have the scale in front of them. Should I act out or shouldn't I act out? And the pain of acting out and the pain of being sober is pretty much the same, or maybe there's a little more consequences to one side, which keeps him sober for a little while because his wife's threatened to leave him, whatever. And it can work out that way, but not an existence that I want to live. I never want to live that way again. I did that for 8 months. That was hell. That was hell. And you see that in rooms. You see that, people come and they do the most minimum amount of work, but they're either going to be happy and okay because they weren't addicts in the first place, or you're going to see them get more and more dry, drunk, and they get really, really unhappy. They're angry and they're just sad, and they're just you can see that they're not getting what they need, and they haven't found the recovery. They haven't found the answer. The solution is there, but they're just not ready to grab it.
Now I'm going to ask you to define 4 words that maybe you've never thought about this, but maybe you have. I don't know. If you wouldn't mind defining the words abstinence, sobriety, recovery, and healing. Define those 4 different terms and see. I'm just curious to see what your take on those 4 terms might be.
Okay,
the difference in your own mind.
All right. So abstinence for me is stopping the behaviors and nothing more. If I'm abstinent, it means I didn't go down to an escort. I did not masturbate. I did not do anything physically in my addiction. That's abstinence. It's not what I'm looking for, because I need progressive victory over lust. I need the fantasy in my head it's always there if I let it be there.
Right.
Okay, so sobriety, as we already kind of discussed, is that place where I'm really not acting out for a length of time. I'm abstinent, and hopefully I'm doing program, I'm doing something, but I'm not in recovery because I'm not living in the solution. I'm just living sober, which is great because the physical part of the disease, the brain chemistry, the neurochemistry stuff has improved. So I'm going to be in a physically better place. I'm going to probably have a little more energy than I had. Hopefully I'll be a little more honest, a lot more honest than I was. But it's not living happy, joyous, and free as the big book describes. Recovery is where I want to live, and that's living happy, joyous, and free. And in the big book, on page 84, it describes the 10th step promises, which nobody ever reads at a meeting. Right. Almost nobody ever reads at a meeting. The bottom of page 84, and I'm going to quickly read it to you because I think this is the crux of what recovery should be. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even lust. I change it for lust. For by this time, sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in sexual acting out in lust. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude towards lust has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition.
Powerful. That is, I love that. And I've read that and I remember hearing that before, but the way you brought that into this just kind of ties it up nice and neat.
What was the 4th word?
Healing.
Healing. and isn't that the point, right?
Yep.
The healing is in your recovery, and it's a day-to-day life's work for me. If every day I wake up with the understanding that I can heal myself or the people that I've hurt or the world. Abraham Maslow, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was a therapist, and he believed in that concept of finding meaning in life and purpose. That was the top of his pyramid. Right, and I think he was a forerunner to what we understand in the 12. He appreciates the 12 steps. I think he's very much like that. He talks about shame. He talks about finding your own self-worth along the way. And the top of that pyramid is meaning and purpose in life. And I think that my meaning and purpose in life is that healing. The word healing is the top of that pyramid for me. and it's healing myself, and it's healing the world. It's healing the people I love and I care about in my life, those I've hurt and those I never hurt. The people that I work with as sponsees, who are my sponsees today, that's where I want to be. That's where Harvey wants to live.
That's awesome.
Have you ever read the book Sitting in a Rowboat?
Throwing marbles at a battleship?
Right.
That was another life changer for me.
I think that description that he has of throwing marbles at that battleship, and how today he's surrounded by other rowboats with men with blowtorches. And he looks across and he sees the stacked up old battleships that are there that represent all of these men's own struggles and own wars with their battleship that they battled with the help of other people in their rowboats surrounding them and being there for them. I think that's a tremendous visual that I think is really powerful in the program.
Yeah, and I think I'll link to that in the show notes of this so that others can find that, because it was a game changer for me. And I had already gone through the program. I'd already worked the steps, and I was sponsoring, and I think it was my second or third person I was sponsoring. And he said, "Hey, have you ever heard of this book?" And I was like, "No, I never have." And he shared it with me, and I was like,
And the stuff that he writes to the women, it's also very,
amazing.
Very powerful.
Amazing.
Very, very powerful. I appreciate today, my sponsor made it very clear to me that we did step 4, step 5, 6, and 7. It's not a one shot. And you sort of said this, we'll read through the 12 steps once and I'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who really is serious about their recovery, just as we appreciate that new amends are going to come up, even with the same people I already did my amends, as I described with my children, and appreciating that I needed to go back to them and say, hey, you know what? I was not there for you in this way, which I didn't even appreciate until now, that I can appreciate what I was supposed to be and what kind of a parent, what was my role as a parent, which I completely abdicated, and now I understand that I could have been, my wife and I could have been a paradigm for their life, and understanding what my daughter's role should be next to their husband, what my son's role should be with their wives, all of that, the same way I know today I have done my 4-step 3 times in 5 years, and I'm about to do it again. I take a weekend off, and I go to a quiet place. I go up to my cottage, and I take the weekend off, and I write a new 4-step, because there's still defects, there's still assets, and those assets need to be addressed as well. The big book talks about being a store owner and looking at the shelves and seeing what's good on the shelves and what's not good on the shelves. And many people make the mistake of actually getting quite frightened of doing a 4-step because it's all about the defects. My sponsor spends at least a few hours before he does the defects, before we talk about selfishness and stuff. He talks about your assets, because he wants to make sure that you appreciate that when it's all done, you're not a bag of garbage, you're not an empty bag of junk, nothing, and you've thrown everything away. And that's part of that same beginning when we talked about that, working on that self-esteem and positive affirmations and dropping the ego down and appreciating you don't need this ego anymore, and appreciating that God loves you and you're his child, and all of the positive affirmations of being that son of God, and knowing that he loves you unconditionally, and that you're worthy, and he's got so much to be grateful for. All of that's the antidote to that low self-esteem, and that 4-step, those assets that you need to start with, and appreciate that, hey, you're not just junk, you're sensitive, you're actually a good communicator, you're musical, you're a good listener, you're good, all of these things that you are. In some cases, you've taken them to extremes that are bad.
Right.
And yes, we have to fix that. And the 12 and 12 talks about some of our defects actually being assets that we took to extremes that weren't good.
Yeah.
I want to be a person who cares about doing the best I can and being proud of my achievements, like my father with his cobblestone road, right? I don't want to get to the point where I don't care about trying to be good and trying to do well and trying to achieve.
Right.
I just don't want it to be a perfectionist craziness. I don't want to go to crazy places with it, but there are positive things that are, that can be taken to extreme that I need to work on. And every year I go back and I look at my assets and I read my old stuff and I start again. And I look at what am I still working on? What haven't I achieved yet? What does Harvey keep grabbing, back from the bag that he put in front of God's throne? Because I describe the seventh step as asking God to take my defects, right? And I have a bag and I put them in front of him, and then, but the next day I just grab them back. Right? I can do that. The first time my wife and we were going to a recovery meeting, and I had finished the steps and we went to a recovery meeting and I got really angry at her because she wasn't supporting me with my children. She said, it's not my job. And she was quite upset. And I almost threw her out of the car. And I got to the meeting and I came home from the meeting and I called Cameron and I said, Cameron, I think I have to reset. And he says, what do you mean? He said, did you lose your sobriety? I said, well, I lost my emotional sobriety because I just screamed and swore at my wife. And I vowed I would never do that. I gave away that anger. I put it in that bag and I put it in front of God already. He says, yeah, you took it back. He says, just do the work, go back and do your 4, 5, 6, 7 again, and you have to do that spot inventory every day. And I do spot inventories most every day. There's always something, that I have to, that's another topic.
No, this is good stuff, man. Well, Harvey E. in Toronto, one last thing before we close this up. I'd like to invite you to maybe give a little testimonial or a pep talk to somebody who's hearing this and battling themselves or somebody else about taking that next step into admitting a problem and going into trying to recover from addiction they've maybe been battling with for decades.
All right. So can I do it as a prayer?
Absolutely. Please.
Okay. So my dear Father in heaven, please, I'm so grateful for all you have taught me, for all that you have shown me in my life, all the gifts, all the lessons you have shared with me, and that I'm here in this world today with the understanding that my purpose in life and my meaning is to help those who have yet to find the hope that is here, that you have in your hand, that is stretched out waiting for them to just grab on, find the fellowship, find the help, be able to understand that just because they can't do it alone, that doesn't mean that they can't do it. And that, in fact, you have placed in this world so many wonderful people, so many wonderful meetings and places and opportunities for those of us who desperately needed you, and appreciate today that you were found, that you were available, that you were there in the fellowship and in the meetings and in the steps, and that you offer that hope, and that it's there for all of us. And I say that in your name.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very powerful. I am so grateful that you have been willing to do this. You've opened my eyes and heart even that much more to this process and the importance of getting it out there into at least where people can find it and take action with it.
Well, there you go. There's Harvey E., one of my heroes. Thanks for listening to this the last little bit, and I look forward to sharing further steps with you. Next meeting will be step 3 with Bill M. He did come on with Rico 12 once, and his story of step 3 is a game changer for me also. When I spoke with him, I thought, well, this guy's got a lot of years of sobriety. I'm going to learn something, and I learned a lot from the lessons he learned after a lot of years of sobriety. So come back in a few days, and that one will be up. Thanks again for your support of Rico 12. If you find in these meetings and in these episodes value and meaning, please consider donating and rating and reviewing in the podcast platform of your choice. And remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching